Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our series of videos about Oracle Intelligent Advisor. And following on from the previous videos, this one is going to look at the concept of flow schemes again, and we'll also discuss seed data, global seed data in a Intelligent Advisor flow. You'll recall from previous videos that I was working with a flow scheme called Test Scheme RN. And because I didn't want to make changes to it, I went to the Actions menu, I exported it, and then I re-imported it. And when you re-import it, you get a chance to change the name. So I created a copy called Test Scheme 2 RN. And in Test Scheme 2RN, just to review a little bit about what a flow scheme actually is. A flow scheme defines a palette. It's like a combination of many things that you're probably familiar with in Oracle Policy Modeling. It defines the controls that the flow designer can use in their flow. So it defines the controls that you can use in an interview. And you can see here that I have a calendar control, a currency control, and these are all standard. And if I select one, you'll see that each of them has a name so that they show up in your palette when you're designing a flow, an integration ID, a tag if you will, the data type, the input style, and then, if necessary, a formatter to say whether the information is going to be formatted as a date, formatted as something else. And you also have custom properties. Those of you who've worked with interviews and JavaScript extensions will know that you have custom properties, and they've been around for a long, long time, custom properties. So, in a sense, this allows a flow scheme designer to specify what controls are available to a flow designer. It clearly, to me, begins to illustrate that a flow scheme project is going to be created and managed by somebody who is not at all the same person as the person who will design the flow itself. So this is likely to be a technical job because the technical person will know what controls are necessary because they'll know about the renderer, they'll know how they're interpreted in their renderer from the Flow Engine API. As well as controls, you can also specify input data. So it's a bit like defining available input data so that anyone who creates a flow based on this flow scheme, there's going to be input data that is available for them to, for example, if there was a piece of data in here, they would see it in their flow project and they could add it to a screen, add it to a page in order to collect it from the end user. So they wouldn't have to go through the process of creating the attribute. In a sense, if you think about it from a policy modeling point of view, the attribute would already be there. So we're going to add a number, and we're going to call it the other number, and we'll display it as the other number, and the other number is how it will, this is its field name default. Right, so we've defined a piece of input data that anyone who uses this scheme, they should see it immediately when they start creating their flow using this using this scheme. A scheme also includes other pieces of information that we would have seen in different places in Oracle Policy Modeling. For example, it defines how a currency is to be displayed and handled. So it's displayed with a custom number format, with 2 decimal places, with a leading 0 for numbers less than 1, and a currency symbol, and so on. The language tab is kind of the information that you would have seen, for example, in decision services, or you would have seen it in Oracle Policy Modeling in the language tab. And if you keep scrolling down, you'll see a bunch of strings. These would have been the strings you would see in the styles dialog in the strings tab in Oracle Policy Modeling Interview. And then there's a bunch of general parameters which are specifically related to how you can debug, or rather how you can run a Oracle Intelligent Advisor flow using an external debugger, which we've talked about in a previous chapter, and we will talk about again in the not too distant future. So we've created a new element in our test scheme, I'm going to go ahead and commit the test scheme. Recall that I'm going to commit the flow scheme. Remember that a flow scheme doesn't have a deployment. You just commit it. And I will go to my flow project. Now I'm going to go and create a new flow, and it will use my new flow scheme, and it will be stored in my workspace. So I'm going to call this the RN Hello World v2, and I'm going to go straight into the flow. In the main section, you'll notice over here that it recalls that I am actually coming from this new flow scheme, and there is an input which has been made available by the scheme. So you can see that the other number is all ready to go. Let's build a interview this time. Sorry, let's build a flow with a couple of pages now. So page 1. And we'll drag in an item such as a number. And we'll say, please enter the first number. And we'll set up this number. We'll call this first number. We'll say the initial value is 0, and it's always required, and we'll say that it must be at least 0. So far so good. We'll also add a label. That says welcome. So good. We'll add a second page, just drag and drop it into position. Page 2. We'll add a label. Richard Napier.
Richard, Roy McCune returning your call.
Hello there. Thank you for calling back. I really do appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and enter another number. And this time on our second page, I'm going to add a label. And in the label, I'm going to enter a piece of information such as the other number provided is, and then I'm going to use substitution, and you'll notice that the other number shows up, that piece of information that was defined in the flow scheme. So I am going to display the other number, which was defined as an input according to the flow scheme. And finally we'll add in another item. We'll add a third page. And to top it off, we'll go to the project tab, we'll go to the rules tab, and we'll do something like, the interview is successful if the number equals 42 and the other number equals 1. And we'll make sure, of course, that the magic number is how we refer to our first piece of information. My bad for typing the first number instead of the magic number. So in the first screen, or the first page, we talk about the magic number. And in the second page, we display the other number that was defined in the flow scheme inputs. And in the final page, we're going to add a label just to display again through substitution, whether the interview is successful or not. And we'll commit it, and we'll deploy it. So now we have a flow that has input, both in the form of input from the end user and input coming through the scheme, and then we have a final page with a substitution item for the interview successful. We go into Visual Builder, we go into our service homepage, and we'll create ourselves a web app to do exactly what we did the last time, only this time we'll take advantage of our new flow scheme piece of input. So we create a new application. We'll use an empty template as before. We'll create a web app. And we'll use the same navigation style as before. Once the web app has initialized in the web app designer, we can go over to the components and we can search for our component again. And we can install the Intelligent Advisor Flow component after accepting the terms and conditions. Once that's finished, we can go and add the flow control to our app. Let's change this again. And then we can use this component, we can add it to our flow. And we can select the Intelligent Advisor Flow component. And you'll recall that we have to enter some properties. So we'll give it an ID. Then we'll fill in the site URL, which is just the initial part of the URL for your hub before the word OPA hub. We'll come back about the token, of course, which you'll remember. You will call this is called RN Hello World V2. And we're going to set up the token, and then we're going to talk about global input data. You may remember also that we have a little bit of work to do. And we'll return to design mode. Okay, so now we have a better height, at 100% height. And in our Intelligent Advisor Flow, we now have to replace the token, and we'll also talk about global input data. So as before, rather than using the session control, I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to go into Postman, I'm going to authenticate, and then generate the JSON Web Token. So I'll go and make sure, first of all, that I generate an authentication, that I generate a token. And then I'll call flow start, and in the body I'll make sure that I call for the start of the flow for a session of the correct project. I'll send that post request, and the Flow Engine API should send me back a JSON Web Token, which I can then use for my session. So I'm going to copy that, paste it into the token section, and make the necessary adjustment to the spelling, and verify that when I step off the token, we begin to see that the session is open. There we go. So we can see welcome, please enter the magic number, and so on. So now we need to use the global input data property to pass a value into the flow for the other number that was specified as input in the flow scheme. In the global input data, I'm going to create an object, and let's give it a value of 23, and I'm sure you can guess what this is going to be, the other number. So I'm using the tag which defines the other number, and I'm going to give it a value of 23. Now I will start my debugger. So I'll take a look at my Visual Builder application. The first magic number is 42. I'll click Continue, and you'll notice that on page 2 the value of 23 has successfully been passed into the flow using the flow component in Visual Builder by providing a global input object, and in that global input object I specified that the other number had a value of 23. And when I continue, you can see that the interview is not successful. If I go back and I enter, for example, okay, so let's go back and enter the number 1 and re-debug. And we'll enter a magic number of 42. The other number provided is 1, and therefore the interview is successful. So we've seen that the global input data property is very similar to the concept of seed data. In this instance, it's global seed data, so it is literally a JSON object that contains tags, in this case the other number, which of course refers to the other number, which was defined in the flow scheme, and in the flow scheme the other number was defined here. So this is the origin of the tag, and this is the origin of the other number and the field name called the other number. So you can see that flow schemes allow administrators or technical teams to define not just the controls that we can use, but also elements of the flow that need to be taken into account by the flow designer. In this case, a specific input, which then we included on our flow by including it in a page. Well, we didn't have to include it in a page, but obviously we included it as part of our logic. So we need to know that that existed and that that was a number and so forth. And we could see that over here, the other number, coming from the scheme input, the other number. That's it for this round. In the next video, we'll talk about handling the end of our flow. See you next time.